How do you know how many reps you should be doing per set? It's actually simple because you want to do the number of reps required to take you to momentary muscular failure or just short, 1 rep short of momentary muscular failure. The reason there's some variability there is you're trying to recruit maximum muscle fibers responsible for strength and hypertrophy. And as you get closer and closer to muscular failure, you're recruiting more and more muscle fibers. There is some research that shows 1 rep shy of muscular failure and failure itself to not have a big difference in the result. So if you want to stop 1 rep short, the benefit to that would be it's a little less taxing on the central nervous system and you may get better recovery out of it. So if you're wanting to train more frequently, stopping a rep short could be advantageous. If you are not training frequently, going the extra half rep or whatever it is that makes you fail could be worth the payoff. So there's not a right or wrong answer in my research to whether or not you should take that extra half rep to failure, other than I would say the more frequently you're going to train, and specifically that muscle, then the less frequently you probably want to go that extra half rep to failure. With that said, the goal of your sets is to push to momentary muscular failure or just short, but also you want to keep in mind that your first goal within any set is to get good form with whatever progression you're currently working. So if you are doing push-ups, you don't just want to do push-ups, you want to do push-ups with proper form to get the biggest benefit out of the exercise. Move the muscles through the full range of motion. So you're building strength throughout the full range of motion. No 3/4 repping or half repping, or if you've heard those terms. So step 1, when you are working on a new progression, is get good form. It's going to feel awkward at first. Anytime you make a progression to a new, up the progression tree, it's going to feel really strange. Even myself, when I'm working on something new, it's a new movement pattern, right? So I don't feel like I've got it down. It feels awkward. Sometimes I fall over or whatever. The same thing will happen with you. So first step, get good form. After you have good form and you're doing sets to momentary muscular failure or just short, you want to ensure that you are getting an overload, a progressive overload like we talked about. That's what's going to ensure that you are making progress and gains instead of just spinning your wheels. So why this is really important is there's 2 things you can do to ensure overload. They are going to be increasing the volume, which means adding more reps, or increasing the intensity, which means making the movement harder, similar to adding more weight if you were going to the gym. So what's going to happen is you start a new movement like push-ups. Okay, you get your form down, so now you're good at push-ups at the movement. So now what you do is, the easiest way to overload is to add reps. It's going to be way, way easier to go from 5 reps to 6 reps than it is to go from a push-up to a 1-arm push-up, right? So hopefully that makes sense. So what you want to do is, you want to focus on getting additional reps weekly, bi-weekly, whatever. That you're not always going to make just linear progress. It's going to be a stair step. So there's going to be a week or 2 where you don't make any progress. Then awesome, you got another rep. But you'll start seeing where the rate with which you're adding reps will slow over time. So this is the biggest pitfall I see with people who do body weight training or calisthenics, is their only way to progress, or the only way they understand how to progress, is through just adding more repetitions. And this is where I've seen people, hey, I want to do 100 squats or 80 push-ups. And the thing is, your body's very efficient, very adaptive. When you're adding volume for your overload, it's cool for a while, but then what happens is, where you were adding a rep a week, now you're only adding a rep every 2 weeks and then a rep every month. So now you're putting all this effort in to your training to squeeze an extra rep after a month of training. So hopefully you see where this becomes inefficient, and what we need to do is add intensity. So once you have worked volume to a point where your progressive overload is no longer happening efficiently, now it's time to add intensity. Make the movement harder, which will make it where you cannot perform that volume, and you've got to work to build strength and build that volume back up. So hopefully I'm keeping this as simple as I can. Start out with push-ups. Okay, you get your form down, then you start adding volume. And once you've got, say, 10 or 12 clean push-ups, what I personally do and what I would suggest is look at the next progression, which would be uneven push-ups. they're not that much harder, and all of a sudden it might knock you back down where you can only do 4 or 5. And now it's like adding additional weight to the bar. Now you are doing a more difficult movement for 4 or 5, and so it will be easier to add reps to that movement now because you're not already reaching that point of diminishing returns. And if you've heard of Pareto's principle, it's funny how it applies to almost everything in life, but when you learn a new movement, you're working in that 20% range where 20% of the effort you put forth is getting you 80% of those results. So you're adding volume and things are going good, right? You went from 5 reps to 7 reps, 10 or 12. Now all of a sudden you're outside of that 20% where it comes more easily, and you're gonna have to work harder for less return in the volume range. So it's time to then scale to make the movement more intense or harder, so you're back inside that 20% with the new movement, so that every week it's easier to make progress as a percentage of what you're pushing. So hopefully that makes some sense to you. When you are thinking about how many reps you should be doing, it's whatever number gets you to basically where your muscles are going to fail. And once you start to get to where you're good at a movement like push-ups, when you can do a high repetition count, when you can do a lot of reps, it's time to make that movement harder through increasing the intensity, which brings your volume back down. So it's like a wave. Form, volume, intensity. Intensity brings it where you can't do volume anymore. So you start training for volume. The volume goes up in that new movement till that new movement seems easier. Then you scale it harder. So it's like this wave of intensity, volume, intensity, volume. Hopefully that makes sense. That should at least give you an understanding of the concept. If you have specific questions, by all means, go ahead and ask and I'll answer them in the comments below.